I did not raise my voice. I built a chain of 6 regional trucking terminals from a single flatbed and a busted transmission. But the hardest lesson those 40 years ever taught me was that a signature on a birth certificate guarantees you nothing. My daughter told the whole family I was too senile to be trusted with my own bank accounts. She said it standing in my dead wife's kitchen, at my granddaughter's engagement party, in front of 40 guests holding champagne flutes. I did not argue with her. I set down my coffee, walked out to my truck, and began dismantling, piece by piece, every financial pipeline that had been quietly keeping her household afloat for 11 years. Before I tell you how a forgotten voicemail turned an engagement party into a federal case, let me know which state you're calling in from tonight down in the comments. And if you've ever had a son or daughter try to take what you build out from under you, hit that like button and subscribe, because you already know exactly how this story ends. My name is Walter Higgins. I'm 68 years old, and until 4 months ago, I believed my daughter loved me. The party was in full swing when it happened. 40-some guests packed into the wraparound porch in the manicured backyard of my daughter Denise's house in Willow Creek, Ohio, all of them there to celebrate my granddaughter Casey's engagement to a decent young man named Marcus. String lights hung between the oak trees. A caterer I had personally paid for was still plating little crab cakes on the buffet table. I stood near the drink station in my one good blazer, nursing a black coffee because I'd given up drinking 8 years ago after my wife Carol passed, and I watched my granddaughter laugh with her fiancé's family like she didn't have a single worry in the world. That's when Denise's voice cut through the music. "Dad, can you come here for a second? Actually, everyone, can I have your attention?" I remember setting my coffee cup down on the little glass side table. I remember the way the ice in it didn't even ripple, because my hand was that steady. I had no idea what was coming. I thought maybe she wanted to toast Casey. I thought maybe, for once, she wanted to say something kind about her father in front of people who mattered to her. Instead, Denise stood in the center of the yard, one hand resting theatrically on her chest, and looked directly at me with an expression I hadn't seen since she was 16 and I'd caught her sneaking out. "I love my father," she said loud enough for the whole yard to hear. "But I think it's time we all admitted something. Dad's memory isn't what it used to be. He's been making some concerning decisions with money lately. And honestly, at his age, I think it's time we talked about a caregiver, or a guardian, for his own protection." The yard went quiet the way a room goes quiet right before a car crash. 40 faces turned toward me. Casey's smile froze mid-laugh. Marcus's mother, a woman I'd met exactly 1 hour earlier, looked down at her shoes, too polite to witness whatever was about to happen. My son-in-law Richard stood beside Denise, nodding along like a man agreeing with a weather report. Richard had never once, in 11 years of marriage to my daughter, held a job for longer than 14 months. I knew this because I was the one who quietly covered the gap every single time. I did not raise my voice. I did not spill my coffee. I looked at my daughter, standing there in a $2,000 dress I had paid for, in a house whose mortgage I had co-signed, at a party I had personally funded down to the ice sculptures, and I asked her one simple question. "Which decisions, Denise?" She faltered, just slightly, the practiced speech cracking at the edges. The withdrawals. The transfers. "Dad, you sent $11,000 to some account in March and you don't even remember doing it." I remember doing it. I remembered it perfectly, because I had wired that $11,000 directly into Richard's failing home inspection business at Denise's own tearful request, 6 weeks after Richard's boss let him go, for reasons nobody would specify. I had the wire confirmation saved in a folder on my laptop. I had the text message where Denise wrote, verbatim, "Thank you, Dad. We won't forget this." They were counting on me to be embarrassed. They were counting on the crowd, the champagne, the pressure of 40 strangers watching an old man's dignity get peeled off in public, to make me crumble, apologize, hand over control before anyone thought to check the math. I set my napkin down on the buffet table, folded once, corners matched. "Enjoy the party," I said. "The crab cakes were expensive. Somebody should get some use out of them." I walked past my daughter, past Richard's outstretched conciliatory hand, past 40 guests who suddenly found their shoes fascinating, and I let myself out through the side gate into the cool April evening. I did not go to a hotel. I did not go to my sister's place 2 towns over. I climbed into my truck, sat behind the wheel in the dark, and for exactly 90 seconds, I let myself feel it, the full, ugly weight of watching your own child try to erase you in front of a crowd for the crime of no longer being useful in the way she wanted. Then my phone buzzed. It was an alert from my private bank, the one Denise didn't know existed. The one I'd quietly moved my real assets into 3 years earlier after Richard asked one too many pointed questions about my will. A pending authorization request. Someone, using a power of attorney document I had never signed, was attempting to freeze and redirect access to the joint account I kept for Casey's remaining college tuition. My granddaughter's tuition account. The one thing in this entire mess that had nothing to do with Denise or Richard at all. I sat very still in that truck, engine off, snow, no, it was April. Just cold rain starting to tap the windshield, and I understood, with total clarity, that this had never been about my memory. This had been planned. Someone had already drafted paperwork. Someone had already decided, before a single crab cake was served, that tonight was the night they'd make their move, and the public humiliation was only supposed to soften me up first. I did not feel sorrow. I felt something colder and far more useful settle into my chest. The war had started an hour before I even knew I was in one. I drove straight to the office of the one man who had never once lied to me in 30 years, my attorney, Franklin Boyd, whose home number I still had memorized because we'd built half my company's contracts together back when fax machines still mattered. Franklin met me at his office at 9:30 at night in sweatpants and a Cincinnati Reds t-shirt, took one look at my face, and put on a pot of coffee without being asked. "Whatever this is," he said, "start from the beginning." So I did. I told him about the $11,000 I'd wired Richard in March, and the $9,000 before that in September, and the 4 separate temporary loans over the past 2 years that had somehow never come due for repayment. I told him about co-signing their mortgage in 2019 when Denise cried on the phone about losing the house. I told him about Casey's tuition account and the attempted authorization I just watched happen in real time on my banking app. Franklin pulled up something on his own laptop, cross-referencing county filings, and his face changed. "Walter," he said slowly, "there's a petition already filed. Guardianship of the person in estate, filed 11 days ago. Franklin County Probate Court. Denise Higgins Malone, petitioner. 11 days. Which meant while I was picking out ice sculptures and paying the catering deposit for my own granddaughter's engagement party, my daughter had already been sitting in a lawyer's office building a legal case that I was too mentally incompetent to manage my own affairs. There's a hearing date," Franklin added, scrolling further. 3 weeks from Thursday. And Walter, the petition lists a supporting affidavit from a physician, Dr. Sandra Okafor. Says here she conducted a cognitive evaluation on you back in February. I had never met a Dr. Sandra Okafor in my life. I have never in 68 years failed to recognize a forgery the moment I saw the shape of it, and this one had a shape I recognized instantly because I had seen its twin used against my own late father decades ago by a business partner trying to muscle him out of a company. Someone gets a compliant or bought physician to sign paperwork claiming an evaluation that never occurred. It works because most people never think to check. Most people are too devastated by the accusation itself to demand the receipts. I am not most people. I spent 40 years reading freight manifests and audit trails for a living. I know exactly what a manufactured paper trail smells like. "I want everything," I told Franklin. "Every transfer, every filing, every conversation Denise and Richard have had with anyone regarding my finances going back 2 years. I want to know who Sandra Okafor is, whether she's even a licensed physician in this state, and I want to know before that hearing date, not after." Franklin didn't blink. He'd represented me through 3 hostile supplier disputes and 1 attempted union raid on my drivers back in 2011. He knew what it looked like when I decided to stop being patient. "I'll bring in Marcus Webb," he said. "Best forensic investigator I know. Ex-FBI. He'll find whatever's there to find." I drove that night, not to a motel, not to my sister's, but 40 minutes north to the small lake house Carol and I had bought together 22 years ago, and that neither Denise nor Richard even knew still existed under my name, because I'd quietly moved the deed into a family trust years before anyone thought to look. I let myself in, turned on the heat, sat down at the kitchen table where Carol used to do crosswords, and I opened my laptop. The first thing I did was cancel every recurring transfer, every automatic payment, every guarantee I had quietly co-signed on Denise and Richard's behalf. Their mortgage guarantee, the car payment on Richard's truck that I'd been covering temporarily for 8 months, the credit line I'd opened for his home inspection business that had never turned a profit in 3 years of operation. One by one, I severed every artery. I did not do it out of spite. I did it because a man who is being formally declared incompetent to manage his own money has no business continuing to hand it out. 3 days later, Marcus Webb called me with his first report. "Mr. Higgins, I need you to sit down for this." I told him I was already sitting. Sandra Okafor is a licensed physician, retired. Her license lapsed 18 months ago after a malpractice settlement nobody made public. She's been doing private consulting evaluations for exactly this kind of situation. Cash payments, no formal exam, signs whatever affidavit the family needs. I found 2 other guardianship cases in the past 3 years where her name shows up on suspiciously similar paperwork. How much did they pay her? $6,000, wired from a joint account under Richard Malone's name, 2 weeks before the petition was filed. $6,000 to manufacture a diagnosis that would have handed my entire estate, my company shares, and every decision about my own body and finances to my daughter and a son-in-law who had never once, in 11 years, managed to keep steady work. "There's more," Marcus said. "I pulled banking activity on the account tied to Richard's business, the one you'd guaranteed, Mr. Higgins. I don't think this is only about the guardianship." I asked him what he meant. "There are recurring transfers going out to a private account not connected to Denise or Richard's names at all. Started about 14 months ago. Goes to a woman named Priya Chandra. I ran her down. She's not a vendor, not a business contact. She's listed on a lease in Columbus. Richard's name is also on that lease." I sat at Carol's kitchen table in complete silence for a long moment. I had spent 11 years bailing out a man's failing business. A man who had been quietly funding a second apartment for a woman my daughter had never once mentioned, using money that had, at every step, originated from me. I thought I would feel rage. What I felt instead was a strange, clean clarity. The same feeling I used to get standing on a loading dock at 4 in the morning when a shipment finally made sense after hours of a manifest not adding up. The pieces had simply been rearranging themselves this entire time, and I had just been too busy loving my daughter to look directly at the picture. "Keep digging," I told Marcus. "Quietly. I want to know everything before that hearing." 2 weeks passed. Denise called 11 times. I let every single one go to voicemail. She left messages ranging from wounded to furious to, by the final week, genuinely frightened, her voice cracking as she said things like, "Dad, please. The accounts are all frozen. Richard's business line got shut off. What did you do? And I need to talk to you before Thursday." I saved every voicemail. Franklin told me to. Every one of them, time-stamped, was a small brick in a wall I hadn't realized I was building. Casey called too. My granddaughter, the one person in that entire family I had never once doubted. She didn't yell, she didn't accuse. She simply said, "Grandpa, I don't understand what's happening, and Mom won't tell me anything, and I'm scared." That was the one call I answered. "Casey," I told her, "I need you to trust me for a few more days. None of this is about you, and none of it is going to hurt your future. I promise you that." She asked if her tuition money was safe. I told her it was safer than it had ever been because I had already moved it, that same night, into an account under a trust with her name as sole beneficiary, one that no court filing against me could touch because it had never belonged to me in the eyes of the law to begin with. It belonged to her. She cried on the phone, and for the first time in 3 weeks, so did I. The hearing was set for a Thursday morning in a modest courtroom in downtown Willow Creek. I arrived in my good blazer, the same one from the engagement party, with Franklin Boyd on one side and a leather folder under my arm containing 4 months of Marcus Webb's investigation. Denise arrived with Richard and her own attorney, a young man in an expensive suit who clearly had not been told the full story his clients were operating from. Denise would not look at me. Richard sat with his arms crossed, wearing the exact posture of a man who has already spent, in his mind, money that was never his. The judge, a sharp-eyed woman named Judge Alvarez, opened by reviewing the petition and the supporting affidavit from Dr. Sandra Okafor. Franklin stood. "Your Honor, the petitioner's medical evidence is fraudulent. Dr. Okafor's medical license lapsed 18 months prior to the date of this alleged evaluation. She never met with my client. She was paid $6,000 by the co-petitioner, Richard Malone, 2 weeks before this filing to manufacture this document. The courtroom did that same thing the backyard had done at the engagement party. Went silent in the particular way. Rooms go silent when everyone realizes the story they'd agreed to believe just collapsed. Denise's attorney turned to look at his clients with an expression that told me he was already calculating how fast he could withdraw from this case. Franklin was not finished. He laid out the forensic banking records, the lease in Columbus under Priya Chandra's name, the 14 months of transfers. He laid out, item by item, every dollar I had personally sent to keep Richard's business alive, cross-referenced against the exact same months those funds had, in part, been diverted into a second household my daughter knew nothing about. I watched Denise's face as she heard it for the first time, in open court, alongside 40 strangers who happened to be sitting in the gallery for other cases that morning. I watched something break behind her eyes that had nothing to do with me at all. Judge Alvarez dismissed the guardianship petition within the hour, referred the fraudulent affidavit to the state medical board and the county prosecutor, and looked directly at Richard when she said the words, "Possible charges of financial fraud and forgery will be forwarded for review." I did not smile. I did not gloat. I sat with my hands folded on the table exactly the way I had folded my napkin at that party, and I let the truth do the only work I had ever asked it to do. Outside the courthouse, Denise caught up to me on the steps. Richard was nowhere in sight. I would later learn he'd already called a lawyer of his own, separate from hers, which tells you everything about where his priorities had always lived. "Dad." Her voice was small in a way I hadn't heard since she was a little girl standing at Carol's hospital bed the week the doctors first mentioned cancer. "I didn't know about the apartment. I swear to you, I didn't know." I believed her. That was perhaps the strangest part of the whole ordeal. I believed that particular claim completely. But belief and forgiveness are not the same transaction, and I had learned that distinction the hard way over the previous month. "I know you didn't know," I said, "but you knew enough to stand in front of 40 people and call your father senile so a man you loved could steal what was left of my life's work. You knew enough to let a stranger forge a diagnosis on my medical record. Those weren't Richard's decisions, Denise. Those were yours." She had no answer for that, because there wasn't one that didn't require her to admit what she already knew to be true. I told her I loved her. I meant it. I also told her that love and access to my accounts were no longer the same thing, and that if she ever wanted a relationship with me again, it would start with honesty, not with a hearing date. I walked to my truck alone. The months that followed were quiet in a way my life had not been in a very long time. Richard's business folded within 6 weeks, its guaranteed credit line gone, its owner facing a forgery investigation that would eventually end his home inspection license permanently. Denise moved out of the house I had co-signed and into a small rental across town. And for the first time in 11 years, every dollar in her household came from work she and Richard actually did, rather than money I quietly wired in whenever the pressure got loud enough. Casey married Marcus that September, in a small ceremony that I paid for gladly, because that money had never been the problem. The problem had never been generosity. The problem had been mistaking generosity for a debt someone else believed they were owed. I moved my primary residence out to the lake house permanently. I finalized the trust for Casey's education and, eventually, for whatever children she and Marcus might have, structured in a way no forged affidavit could ever touch again. I still run 3 of my 6 terminals myself, some mornings, because there is a particular kind of peace in physical work that no courtroom victory ever quite replicates. Denise calls now, sometimes on Sunday evenings. We talk for 10 or 15 minutes. It's careful. It's honest, at least, in a way it wasn't before. I don't know if we'll ever get back to what we were before that backyard, before the crab cakes and the string lights and the sentence that started with, "I love my father," but some bridges you can rebuild plank by plank. Others you simply learn to live on the far side of, and you make peace with the water in between. If there's one thing this entire ordeal taught me, it's that the people who love you for what you can give them will always, eventually, run out of patience for the version of you that stops giving. And the people who love you simply for being their father will find you again, even after a courtroom, even after a forged diagnosis, even after a backyard full of strangers watching you get called senile over champagne. Money can buy almost anything in this world, but it has never once bought loyalty. And the moment you start treating the two as the same thing, you've already lost something you can't wire back into your account. Did this story remind you of anyone in your own family? Tell me which state or country you're listening from tonight down in the comments. And if you believe a parent should never have to beg their own child for basic respect, hit that like button and subscribe, because there are a lot more stories like this one still to come.